All right, gonna have people start rolling in.
Yep, ready to rock. Love to see it.
There we go. All right, do you guys know the drill? Do me a favor as you guys are coming in. If you can drop in your LinkedIn profile, if you definitely want to connect with other recruiters out there that are excited about growing. And it's also just to make sure that I have the chat set up to actually function and work. All right. Wait, make sure. All right, everybody's jumping in. All
Yeah,
right,
I'm psyched
perfect.
to
There we go.
psyched to see who's in here, see who's coming to troll me. Pumped.
And I know just for everybody that's listening and here. Stuart was a last minute addition to this awesome lineup of like 30 speakers across the week. I've been watching him. I've had the chance to interview him on the Elite Recruiter podcast. And when I shot out just to see out there who wanted to talk, I actually had all these ideas of what to do. And then Stuart's like, I'm happy to share. And I'm like, all right, cool. All my ideas are gone. Like the amount of value that I know that Stuart can add to so many recruiters and their desks is invaluable. So that's why I was just like, please share. So excited to have him here. I'm going to just turn it over and let him roll. If you
Yeah,
could try to add like your questions to the Q&A just to make sure that it's easily being able to, he can find it later. And also if you want to drop in your LinkedIn profile, if you want to connect with other recruiters, drop that in the chat. So Stuart, all yours, buddy.
perfect, Benjamin. Thank you so much. And yeah, so just for context, I probably haven't done as thorough a homework as potentially some of the others in terms of putting decks together. So do forgive me, not that. Like I've always been a person that does their homework at the last minute anyway. So I don't know that that would have changed too much, but I appreciate you thinking of me, Benjamin, and excited to be here. And look, for those of you who don't know me, which I would assume is most of you, um, my name is Stuart Mitchell. I run a company called Hampton North. We're a cybersecurity specialist search firm. We operate solely in the US. I know I have a non-familiar accent, but the US is home. I've been here for 11 years. Lived in New York, lived in LA, lived in San Diego. Somehow ended up in Central Connecticut, mostly because my wife is the real boss, and so that's how we ended up where we ended up. But very much, though a British accent, I have a huge focus on the US market, and I'm not one of those Brits who think they're better. I actually think the US market is um, better run in terms of how I look at the search function. That said, if there is another Brit on the in the audience right now, you're about to be disgusted about how I say this. Um, but the riches are in the niches. If you're British, that is niche and you'd be furious. But the riches are in the niches. I had to say it. And the reality is, um, I truly believe that. And that is something that I've benefited from in terms of my career and how that's impacted me. And look, I can give some great stories that I've had over the years, but because I've stayed in one space and really kind of known and doubled down on it, I've been fortunate enough as an agency recruiter to work with some of the best businesses on the planet. Like and this is a flex right now, but I hired a number of the first security engineers at OpenAI. Helped build the security program for Reddit. I've done a lot of work with investment management companies, and look, the long and the short of it is, you know, as we move into whatever the heck, I'm going to really do well to manage my language because it is can be on the cusp. But whatever the heck is in future with the technological advances in our that's in our future with AI and what that's going to mean for recruiters. Um, for me, familiarity is going to be so important. I think we're about to face a huge challenge when it comes to differentiation and being able to connect with our target audiences. And so for me, you know, as we move into a world where everything is really easy to sound the same, because we all have the ability to log into ChatGPT or Claude or DeepSeek and say, "Hey, build me an amazing tailored sequence to target." companies from 20 to 200 people and find this. So like I can sound like Benjamin, can sound like Stephanie, can sound like David, can sound like Alison. Like we can all sound the same. And I can even to some extent copy your voice by grabbing some of the things that you said in the past. And I think like that that is in some instances scary. But I also think for the well-known, well-networked specialist, it creates a tremendous amount of opportunity. Because one thing I would always say is in recruiting, we do get better at this job, but longevity is our friend. When you start to see clients and candidates multiple times around and in multiple cycles, you start to get familiar with them, and people start to become familiar with you as an industry figurehead. Um, and ultimately, the that familiarity as you start to pick up on patterns allows you for huge, huge, huge amounts of credibility. So, look, we're going to dive into the specifics of the topic. I put it into um, three big focus areas. So, we're going to talk about why specialism is crucial, how to choose a specialism. Please don't all choose cybersecurity. My wife wants my kids to go to private school, and if you come in here, I'm screwed. Um, and then staying relevant and useful in your niche. For me, just because you knew everything about Microsoft Dynamics or HVAC technicians 5 years ago, the likelihood of you staying relevant if you aren't building is super important, and that's very pertinent in my industry where what was important 5 years ago in cybersecurity is not that important. So I think, look, let's kind of look at why specialism is so crucial, at least to me, and this is not to everybody, but why it's crucial to me. um my The first thing is really about getting a deeper market knowledge, right? So if I use my industry, cybersecurity, as a baseline, right? So um, the the technologies are so nuanced that whilst you can jump around and play around in keywords, um, the ultimate truth is just because a resume says something doesn't necessarily mean that it's telling the entire story. So, if you look at the difference between a security architect at a big tech company or a security architect at a healthcare company or in the government, they may even have the same keywords, but as you understand your industry a little bit better, whereas in the same way, if you're in the healthcare space, like a nurse may be such a generic title, and I don't know that word, but like there's probably 100 different types of nurse. And so, like, if you can understand all the different types of nurse, like that knowledge is so important. Whereas if you told a generalist recruiter and they went diving through, look, you can fail by banging your head against the brick wall and really understanding. But if you just know that I need a security architect from a healthcare company and these are the challenges they're going to face, that makes a huge difference and really gives you that certain amount of credibility. And so for me, as somebody who has kind of grown up the last 8, 9, 10 years in this domain, it's the little things and the intricacies that you start to pick up on, that just make you sound so much better and so much credible, like much more credible. And to add to that, like you'll meet new clients who haven't hired in this space or have hired terribly in the space before. um, and the long and the short of it is we are consultants, right? Like that is the language that rightly or wrongly is used, particularly in our early career. We're recruitment consultants now. There's lots of founders, lots of solopreneurs, lots of exec search, whatever. But we're recruitment consultants. People ask us like, what should I be paying for a sales executive with 3 years experience? What should I be paying for an FMCG specialist? Like you tell me. I do resent when people, and it makes you sound very unprofessional when you say it depends. I know that it depends. Like the reality is in any situation, it does depend. But if you say, hey, like I know that you're probably going to hire from, these five companies, and this is, this is how it's going to work out for you. You should say, hey, here are your five most obvious competitors. They pay between 140 and 180. These guys are offering a healthcare package that is off the charts. These folks don't pay any equity. Like that credibility and that market knowledge. It's the same way as, if you're getting work done on your house, and let's say you need, I don't know, like let's say you need electrical work and you have a general contractor in, and they're kind of throwing, hey, this could be between two and $67,000. It's like, well, that doesn't help me at all. That's a fairly large amount of range. So I think, like, again, once you're in that field, and the longer that you like you desire to understand it, um, then as you understand, you become much more credible. And look, we know what the challenges are, right? I imagine that every single person on this call, um, once you have them on the call, I'd imagine that you're all pretty good, right? Like you're all very much like, okay, well, you've taken my call, I've kicked the door down or whatever. But if you become a market specialist, and you start to become known and start to become familiar with, hey, I just built, your OpenAI, I just built the team for Anthropic, or your ABC Manufacturing, we just did this for DEF Timbers. Like the more you're in one space and you can run the playbook and run it back, sales becomes easier. And that is like the reality is, I have no doubt that almost all of us have a couple of main challenges. One is getting enough business, and then the second is getting the type of business that we want. And it also allows you to, if you are working with and this has happened to me, and I can tell you one of the I gave some pretty candid feedback to one of the largest financial services companies on the planet, and they told me to take a long walk. But the truth is, you can understand which roles, like I imagine particularly contingent recruiters, like you're working so many roles that are never going to place. And that is, we're only as good as the time that we have in this job. And so understanding that, needing someone, if you're in your market every day and you have a role that's 160K, but this company is only going to pay you 125, like even if they give you 50 exclusive recs, it doesn't mean anything until you get it over the line in most parts. And so, the reality is, if you know your industry, you know your specialism, um, you can very much protect your time. And I'm going to guess, like me, there's not enough hours in the day. And I had this conversation with another founder friend of mine the other day. Most of us are never going to find more time. Like most of us are never going to find it, right? Like we have families or hobbies or like some level of sanity. I doubt you have much sanity in this industry, or you wouldn't be here anymore. But the reality is, like, you're probably not going to get more time. So if you can really be ruthless about what you're spending time on, and being a domain expert helps here. It's like, hey, you're JP Morgan, and why are you paying 40% less than Morgan Stanley and Citi and American Express? Like, I can help you here. Like, we can either, hey, we can go a bit more junior, we can get guys from college or career switches, or whatever, or we need to up the salary. And again, like I had a similar situation with a financial institution where they didn't want to hear that, and the role stayed open for 12 months because they knew better. Um, but the long and the short of it is, like, every time I get on a call, I sit there with the utmost confidence that I am better at hiring in this space than these people. If I had a call with someone about software engineers or DevOps engineers or set, like I don't do sales, but I know that they probably know more about it than me. And that is where all of my credibility goes out the window. Now, look, have I made the odd placement with a client that I already know and trust who will chuck me a solid and help me find a deal? Yes. Would I do it as my business grows? Probably not. Like the reality is, you're spending time on stuff that isn't going to take care of your desk long term. So, um, for me, it is important. And then you look at, how often do you go on LinkedIn, and someone wants to have a whinge about recruiters, right? Like it's, oh, recruiters this, or oh my God, a recruiter called me about a help desk role, and I am the CEO of Apple, like probably a bit extreme, but like how often does it happen? You are as good as your outreach and credibility. And clients and candidates love recruiters who get it. I'm sure you've spoken to, um, I'm sure you've spoken to people like recruiters in the industry, and if you are a niche specialist, you can see their eyes and their body language start to turn when you actually understand what the heck they're talking about. And it's honestly one of my, if I'm sat in a room across from somebody and I called him like a non-believer early on in terms of like, hey, you probably think I'm just one of those guys or whatever. And you can just see like they're, maybe if it's on a video call, they're like half looking at a screen and all of a sudden they have their attention. Or if they're sat in a meeting, they'll be sat like this and then they just kind of get out of their chair. And I'm like, you know what? Like, other than doing a bunch of deals and going on vacation, like, you got to find the little highs in this industry that really get you going. And when you can capture someone who didn't necessarily expect to have that knowledge that you have, like, it is awesome, right? It is one of the best feelings. So I think like clients and candidates value recruiters who get it. Look, the opposite problem is, as a recruiter, sometimes candidates like can get a little condescending where I'm like, hey, like I know about this. This is all I do. You don't have to tell me how to spell this. It's always the men that are condescending, by the way, but it's bad. But yeah, I've had it a few times where they're trying to spell things out, but I would much rather have that than not know what the heck is going on. And so I think, the reality is, and this happens particularly, but everyone is going to be skeptical of you because of what has happened to them in the past. My expectation is that every client you deal with and every candidate that you deal with has probably had a crap experience, and you have to assume that. And your job is not necessarily to convert them to like, oh my God, recruit is the best thing in the world. But like, if you can lead with credibility of, hey, I know this role is a terrific fit for you because you've worked for a Series C growth companies. I know that you're excited about this field. I can tell by the data, and they're paying top of market, and I know that's top of market because I know the market. And likewise, from a client perspective, if you're like, hey, I know that you're hiring from the best companies in Austin. If I can get you someone from Google, CrowdStrike, and Box before the end of the week, do we have something here? And you can speak with that credibility where they're like, whoa, like that's it. And then, the last thing that I say, and if you follow me on LinkedIn, you'd have seen I posted something similar the other day. Um, Half of what your fee is from, once you become an industry specialist, is the the internal recruiters that, to all intents and purposes, we're competing against, um, have access to most of the same tools that we do, but they have to hire, in a lot of cases, for an accountant and then a purchasing manager and then a head of human resources and whatever it may be, right? It's a tricky job, and I would never fancy it because of that reason. But they have the same tools as we do. The difference is, and this is what I say, I was like, if we reached out to 10 people and an internal recruiter reached out to 10 people, I could get hold of all 10. All 10 of them would take my call because of my relationships, my credibility, my connection to them. They might get one or two. And that's what your 40, 50, 70, 100 grand is for, is that you've built the network. It's the classic, I can't remember. It's to do with a plumber, and he hits a hammer and gets paid 20 grand, and the 20 grand is for the knowledge. Someone tells that story way better than I do. And if you don't know it, Google it. But essentially, they're paying you for all the network building that you're doing in the background. So I think it's so important. And again, the reality is, and we'll go into how to choose a specialism in a minute, but um, the truth is, and we do get this, and Tony, I saw a question there. Um, I look at what it takes to bill a million, like, and that is for most of us, that's the goal. I've done it a few times, grateful to say that. And if you get the right niche, you only need to know 200 people and place 10% of them. And like, the reality is, you're probably going to know more than 200 people, but like, if you know 200 of the best people in the world and you can place 10% of them every every 5 years for 20, like 50 back 40, 50 grand to go, you're billing $1 million. And it's so easy in our industry. We can really reverse engineer it to make our job sound so dumbed down that we should all just be millionaires. I'm aware that it doesn't work like that. um, but I sometimes do think we have this fear of loss, right? Of if I go too domain deep, I go too, I go too focused. What am I missing, right? And I think there's a good question. I'll address it a little bit deeper in a little bit. Like, I think sometimes you can find a client where you can have some stretch, right? I think we all find people where you might get creative because you love their narrative and you love, how they treat their candidates, and it's a really good sell, and you get so used to selling them that you can transform. The truth is, you probably need a little bit of help from them to sell that together. But I think, like, if you think about it, we have that such like, oh well, what if they go here? And the long and the short of it is, I made recruiters outside of my scope $700,000 last year, which is it pays to be friends with me. I've uh, got some pretty nice gifts in terms of return. I got a watch, a pair of Christian Dior sneakers, and a couple of Moncler jackets, which is awesome. I don't do it for that, but I'll take the gift. My wine collection's pretty full. But I will refer like people outside of like, if I know people are exceptionally good at what they do, I would much rather refer them to a specialist who are going to do right by me and do the best job for my customer. And I think that's the way that, like, I always look through the lens, is like, if I'm not the guy and they're going to get a subpar service, why wouldn't I want to connect him to somebody I know and trust, and will, like, if you step across the line, I always say you can only screw me once, and it's a dangerous game to play. But these are people I know and trust and don't do my market. And so I think having a connected group of specialists is useful, because you can protect your own interests. You don't want to I can understand not wanting to let a Robert Half Tech Systems type person in, because they're going to want to go and take the account. But let's say you do sales and your friend who you know and trust and is as good as you does network engineering or software development. Um, create some affiliate partnerships, right? Particularly those solopreneurs who have the fluidity to create multiple revenue streams. I have some folks on speed dial who are like affiliates of my business, but don't make sense for us as a specialist. But it is really useful, and as a small business owner, I would say definitely get those in place. So, um, look, let's kind of talk about how to choose a specialism, right? Because I think this is important. The long and the short of it is, you don't have to stick with this forever, and it can evolve, and it is something that can be fluid. Um, but you have to think about what makes sense for you. Where is the money? Where is the opportunity? Right? Like, I think, if you look at some of the more volatile markets that we've seen over the last few years, like, if you're a recruiter in Web3 and crypto in 2021 and 2022, there's every time, if you manage your money correctly, you probably could be done by now. Um, and a lot of folks jumped on that wagon. Some did it for the passion and were passionate about the space and the industry and what was happening there. Um, some people jumped on that wagon because it was hot and there was a lot of money and opportunity to be made. I'll throw in things like NFTs around that, and there was just such huge opportunity. 2023, 2024, that market bottomed out, and I've seen a lot of people have to get creative. I do think it's on the rise. It's not my space, but I look at some of the companies hiring in that space, and it is coming back. But I think, if you want to choose a specialism, I think the first thing is to choose something that you can get somewhat interested in, right? Like, do I wake up and do cybersecurity? No. Do I find that the challenges and business problems and what it could mean interesting? Yes. Like, am I a cyber guy? No. I hang out with my family and like sports and whatnot. And I know there's recruitment specialists who only recruit for sports companies. That sounds awesome. But like, the reality is, you've got to kind of have a look at what you can be interested in that can also make you money. And then you have to look at, is the market demand there? Like, I'm kind of looking at AI right now, and the problem with shiny object is everyone thinks that's a great idea right now. And it's like, okay, would you rather be let's say there's a $1 billion industry and there's 50,000 recruiters, or there's a $50 million industry with seven recruiters. Like, you kind of got to do a little bit of math and the ratios. And I looked, cyber was incredibly hot 3 or 4 years ago, and a lot of people left because it went down. I feel I would much rather have a smaller, flat, less up and down marketplace, that I can stay in, that there is less competition, then I would be chasing next shiny object syndrome. And then you have to look at, an industry that kind of you can evolve with, but kind of goes past the length of time, right? Like, and that's a weird thing to say, and there's definitely a better way to say it, but um, legal, right? Like, if I think about legal, like, lawyer's gonna lawyer, right? Like, America is never gonna stop chasing litigation. But then you look at it and you're like, okay, well, if I do legal, do I do corporate? Do I do general counsel? Like, you can really, like, one of the best recruiters I know, his sole domain, this is all he places, are people going from corporate law that want to go in-house. And he creates a process, he creates, a package around that, make sure the reasonings are right, and that is all he does. And he pitches to certain clients who like people from corporate law to come in and be their GC, or I've only watched Suits, so I don't know a lot about law. But basically moving Harvey Specter's to Procter and Gamble's is what I get. But ultimately it's you look at things, and look, cyber is another thing where it's, it has highs and lows, but it's going to evolve within businesses. It used to be 100% like center of excellence with 500 people, then it's very automation heavy, then we focus on compliance, then we focus on network, etc. So things move and things evolve, but it doesn't disappear. You look at the same with healthcare. Look, we've been trying to disrupt that. There's been billions and billions and billions of dollars of investment in healthcare. I still get a paper bill, right? Like, we haven't disrupted anything. It still sucks. But that is always going to happen, and that's going to continue. So you kind of got to look at things of like, okay, is there enough money flowing in it to be interesting? Can I get shafted? And we'll go into compliance in a minute, but is there something that can supersede what I'm doing right now? And if so, how can I evolve? And I look at, like, Web3 or crypto, whatever, there's no kind of before or after or little evolution, and the swings, but like in the currency too, are pretty volatile. And you can be I do think you can be a solopreneur, catch the upswings, build 2 million in 7 months, and then disappear if you manage your finances correctly. But it is a volatile industry, and most people are not geared for volatility. And they want consistency. They want an industry that they know continue to provide for them and their family and their team and their teammates. And I think there's different domains that can be looked at. And I think, look, you got to, if you do the research, you kind of look at industries, and I think where we add the most value, and I'm sure that you will agree in terms of the successes that you've had over the years, is candidate constrained markets, right? If I look at it as a case of like, okay, if I present you with this candidate, if I have a great candidate, can I get them 5 interviews? Can I use that to bring new business? And I think if you're working in a client controlled environment, specialism is very difficult, because how much value are you bringing to your clients other than like convenience? I think if you are like, hey, you you can't attract this talent. You've been trying, no one good has applied, and you can't get it there. I think you really want to be looking at where are the skill shortages, and I think going beyond that, if you're passionate about these things, like, look at the future of AI. I think it's really easy to look at where that might remove jobs. Um, in the short term, like, what opportunity is that going to create, right? Like, that's something to kind of think about and get excited about. Is like, okay, is there a is there a world where prompt specialists, like, again, we're looking at volatility, but is that a world that's exciting? Are we looking at AI governance? Is there a world where we see, um, is there a world where we see guardrails around this? And compliance is great for business. Like I know it sounds strange, and I know politically we're probably going through a year of less regulation. Um, but follow where the regulations are going, because anywhere there is regulation, there needs to be investment because businesses don't want fines, and that is the long and the short of it. So like companies don't love spending money. Like that's the long and short of it. Not everyone is trying to spend money with us. Let's be totally clear about that. But if spending 40, 60, 80 grand with us begets a $5 million fine, heck yeah, they're on board. And sometimes it's very hard to find tangibility in what they're avoiding and what's not happening. So follow compliance, follow what is coming. Is there, and also I would say bills. I've seen a huge influx in renewable energy and infrastructure bills, and that's where there's a lot of recruitment opportunity because there just aren't enough people. So if you look at market demand and where that's coming from. I think look at areas of regulation, because regulation is super super conducive to spend, and I think that's where you can totally save businesses money. And so um, I think look if you aren't niched up or down right now, I think it's say there's. I would talk to your existing client base and say, hey, obviously want to keep working with you, love working with you. If you think there's something that you're continuously struggling with or see value in, um, what do you think that is today and where do you think that is tomorrow? Because I think that's super, super, super important. So speak to existing contacts, and again, I think it's worth kind of understanding what their actual pain is, and you kind of come out being able to sell far more effectively versus, hey, I've got someone that might be a little bit better than the person who just applied. Um, so look, here we are. We found our niche. We're high value art, we're fashion, we're chemical, we're now a pharma specialist, whatever it may be. Just because we know what we know today and we spent the last 12 months learning, um, now it's time to stay relevant, right? Because every industry that you're going to work with is going to change, right? And that is something that is I see a lot of recruiters kind of sit on their hands and be like, oh, well, I crushed it in 2017. And so you guys should use me because I built this team for these folks and it's not relevant anymore. So for me, the continuous learning is something that's super important to me. I very deliberately curated my personal LinkedIn feed is probably 95% cybersecurity, 5% recruiting. And for me, that gets me access to a lot of news and trends. I'm connected to a lot of thought leaders in the space, and ultimately I have that like access to information because I'm always thinking about not what's going to get like I always feel good about what we're going to do for the next 6 months. What is going to be a challenge in 12, 18, 24 months for these cybersecurity leaders, and how do we get ahead of that? How do we build talent pools? How do we put content together, salary surveys, etc., that are going to make this worthwhile for them? So always kind of staying on top of that. Um, I'm always, always, always asking questions. Like the reality is, you're speaking to clients and candidates every day. If you're not, you're probably in the wrong job. But this is such, such, such an important opportunity to get knowledge from the source. And from my perspective, if you're not pulling both targeted sales and then also relevant industry information out of your client and candidate calls, you're selling yourself short and you're missing out on opportunity. Um, I engage with the community, and I think that's so, so, so important. It's really easy for us. We have a huge amount of events in the cybersecurity space. I speak at, volunteer, attend, throw my card behind the bar in certain places. I think I'm hosting a karaoke event. Mambo number 5 is my go-to. If anyone's seen me do that before, it's horrific, but it's a good time. But ultimately, I think like engaging with the community on a humane and human level. Reddit's a little messy. It's a weird, wonderful world, but I'm sure there's LinkedIn threads and communities and Discords and WhatsApps that you can be part of. And I think if you have an ultimate goal, I'm part of a cohort of founders, and I think the way we look at it is we want to be community leaders, community champions. And if you can create a safe space for thought leaders in your industry to connect without, and you're the puppet master in the background that's brought people together. That's just such a wonderful place. And I look at this as like, how do you go above and beyond what we do? And look, I'm not talking about working for free or really being that kind of, hey, I'll do anything you want. But are you off? Can you put together market insights? Can you get salary benchmarks? Can you talk about what a typical career journey looks like for, in my instance, a security engineer who has an interest in A, these are the four places that you would typically go. Like, can you build those journeys and create that and use that as a benchmark? And even when you're working with clients, you're going to say, hey, you're hiring Sarah or Jerry to come in and fix this problem. These are the four things that I think you're gonna run into from a growth perspective, and being able to do that. And again, if you look to kind of going back to being a resource and being the go-to in the community, the more you can do other than, hey, I can just find you people, the more you can keep people connected. One of the people, I don't work with him, but he now actually works talent advisory for a VC company. One of the things that he tracked two things publicly, and everyone's obsessed with it now. One, he created a thing called Sec Moves, and it's all the big executives that move, and he does a weekly newsletter, and everyone's obsessed with it. You can do that in any industry, and there's no copyright. You're not going to upset anybody. And then there's the funding rounds, which I've started to see a little bit more, more movement, but M&A and investment activity of like, hey, we saw that in the low code space. SaaS Airtable just raised their Series E, making them, here's our weekly or monthly VC update, or hey, this is what Sequoia are doing. So there's so many things that you can do to give back. The other thing, and this is hard, and I think to think very difficultly, different, like think long and hard about this. And Benjamin, you probably have some context of the upside, and that's what this event is about. But you can create podcasts, and people do love to come on. They do love to talk about themselves. And again, if you're going above and beyond and creating a community and putting this all as a package together, and you want to kind of show off some of your network, like that's so exciting. And as Benjamin says, it's a great BD tool. Let's say, hey, I can't get hold of the head of security at Netflix. I'm annoyed. Okay, well, I'll go and get, hey, I've just had the CISO of Hulu come onto the podcast. Here's some of the challenges we talked about in streaming. Like, would you come onto the podcast too? The reality is, again, going back to that point, how do you get the people that you want to talk to you? Um, and that's a huge part of it. And then from a credibility perspective, right, I've kind of paid my dues and kind of worked the way up to get credibility. But now, I have one of the biggest, best known CISOs that sits on my board of advisors, and we have a monthly call to talk about industry trends. So I can never be behind, and I can be accountable. And this is the ex CISO of Reddit, Slack. He's now the chief trust officer at Bumble, and he's my accountability partner. So I have a canary in the coal mine in the industry of like, okay, if anyone speaks, there's a lot of what you realize in your industry is there's a lot of channels that we're not part of, and people are back channeling our efforts and our ideas. And hey, I want to bring Stu on for this search. Is he good or is he full of crap? Like, the reality is having A, people keeping an eye on that, but B, having people speak positively for you is so good. But I have a friend in the industry who makes sure, like, Stu, we're terrified of EU regulation and what that's going to mean for our application security program. Or we're terrified of, if you're in manufacturing, hey, we're going to localize, we're going to need to hire 50 people because we're worried about the tariffs. So we're going to look at bringing people into Detroit or Minneapolis who can work in locally, because otherwise that's going to hurt our business production. So, if you're talking and looking at certain things in certain situations, A, it can create opportunity. But if you have somebody kind of doing that research to you that you can trust, and you don't have to formalize it, it doesn't have to be a board member, but we've all got industry friends, right? We've all got people that we know, that we like, that we trust, who can help us. And if again, it doesn't have to be in a formal capacity, but if you say, "Hey, Lisa, I'd love to pick your brains once a month just to understand, you know, what you're seeing in the compliance space, what's happening in the law firms, who's hiring." You can get Lisa on a recurring, "Hey, if you do this, we'll pay for a conference ticket, or we'll send you a bottle of wine every month, or something like that. We'll send you a DoorDash takeout every other Friday, and that's on us." And you've got somebody doing the market research for you. Having somebody that's close to you, I think is super interesting and important. So, um, I'm going to open the floor to Q&A shortly. Um, in summary, I would say that like being in a niche has like absolutely helped my career. And I think, look, am I the only guy in cybersecurity? No, there's a few. Am I one of the people that my brand stands up every time, and if you drop my name in any Slack channel, people are familiar with it? Yes, and that makes my job so much easier, because in the same reason that people go to Starbucks when people are driving through somewhere they don't know, people go to Starbucks versus the place they don't know. Familiarity is everything. It's why you don't buy a pair of jeans from a place you've never been to before. And so I think creating that brand familiarity is so important. Um, the specialization and being deliberate about it is crucial. Do something like, if you absolutely hate or don't believe in, or have like theoretical differences with how an industry is run, don't run in it. Like, don't work in it. Find something that you are comfortable talking about every day. Work hard, gain trust, gain credibility. It's only going to help you stand out, and then stay relevant. Don't just sit on your hands because you're a healthcare specialist, just because you were good 5 years ago. The crazy thing about our job is no one cares about what you did yesterday. And so I think you can only be as relevant as you are today. And by staying research, staying networked, putting together community events, putting together events that are helpful for folks. You can even do these yourself. Like, that's only going to get you closer. So that's my thoughts. I'm happy to answer any questions. I realize I've spoken into a void for 45 minutes there. Hopefully it was useful. I would love to answer any questions, but hopefully maybe one or two takeaways there.
I've definitely saw some comments and definite takeaways. So if you want to drop your questions for Stuart, I know many of you guys absolutely loved his interview. So this is your chance to shoot him some questions. Great
Could
stuff,
also be
Stuart.
could also be off topic as well if you have any side questions.
Well, while you're thinking of your questions and try to put them in the Q&A just to make it easier, drop an emoji if you are a takeaway from this talk with Stuart. And I love how because I'm a little bit in the cybersecurity world just because of the GovCon space that I'm in, and people know Stuart. So the goal is, how do you become that relevant in the industry that you serve and the niche that you serve?
It is strange, like, and this is so I was at a conference in Las Vegas in last August, and I was on the phone to my mom back in the UK, and somebody stopped me, and she was like, "You're Stuart Mitchell. You're that guy I see on LinkedIn." And like, my mom really has no idea what the heck I do. Like, she just doesn't. And she was like, it like blew her mind because she heard it through the headphones. And again, like, the familiarity of folks, it does make them feel more comfortable working with you and using you. Again, you're probably going to ruffle a couple of feathers on the way. Not, I'm sure not everybody loves me, but I'd rather be known. I use the Captain Jack Sparrow analogy here, which is where they say, "You are the worst pirate we've ever heard of, worst pilot I've ever heard of," and he says, "But you have heard of me," and that's my favorite thing to say if someone is not a fan of my work.
So if you were looking at becoming relevant in your space, but yeah,
Yeah,
like
of
you gave a bunch of tips, tricks, and things that you've
course.
done. If you could start with like one thing tomorrow, what would you do?
I think you have to. So let's say cybersecurity is done, right? Let's say tomorrow, like, "Hey, Stuart, like, let's say I legally can't recruit in cybersecurity anymore. Like, that's the game. It's done." So the first thing I would do is, it would be pretty heavily research focused, of like, okay, where is money going to be spent in the next 3 years? I think if you're starting to look 5 years and 10 years, I think you're probably going to get a little bit ahead of your skis. If you have a huge amount of money in the bank and really want to play the long game, great. But where is money going to be spent in the next 3 years? And I'd be looking at hiring trends, which is really readily available government data, any upcoming legislation, um, and also like I would speak to. I've got a lot of I'm sure most of you do. Like I've got a lot of friends who don't do what you do. So I would start to I'd spend all day and I'd probably go through most people in my phone book and say, hey, they arrested me. I can't work in cybersecurity recruitment anymore. What's your space saying? And that's what I would do if I couldn't do that. So it would be heavily research focused. And then let's say I chose lawyers, right? Let's say I did what my buddy did and I decided to choose lawyers that go to general practice. All I would do for the next 2 weeks is reach out to every candidate in the world and just say, hey, I'm new. Because you only get to be new once, right? And I think the human vulnerability is actually a really attractive trait. Um, you only get to do that whilst you're new. 6 months in, you don't get to say, hey, I'm an idiot. I don't understand what law is. But like the vulnerability of, hey, I'm at least considering spending and I want to get to know like I want to speak to every lawyer from an AmLaw 100 firm who works in mergers and acquisitions. Can I meet you for a coffee? I'll buy you a coffee. I'll buy you lunch. Like, that would be great. That's all I would do for the next 2 to 4 weeks to kind of understand the space.
Awesome. Love that. And you got some questions that popped in. What other questions do you ask candidates and clients outside of what's your outlook for the next 18 to 24 months?
Look, this is so my outlook for the next 18 to 24 months is a strange one because I watch the news and it's weird because by all sense of fundamentals, the market shouldn't be good, but hiring is up, right? It is, I think, like, so for me, I'm somewhat bullish on the last 18 to 24 months. The reality is, um, we went through a recession. Like, it's happened, it already happened, right? It happened a couple of years ago. And I'm probably a little bit more bullish now. Um, in my industry in cybersecurity, there has been a little bit of a purge. And I think people in the bottom 20 to 30% of what they do are going to be squeezed out. And that is not a fun thing to say. It's really not fun to know that some people in our industry aren't going to make it anymore. So I think like make sure that you're affiliating yourself to needle moving talent who are, and this is where it's tough, is who are on board with what corporate wants. And I know that sounds a little biting the butt. But like the reality is, most of the placements that we're going to make over the next 18 to 24 months are going to be focused on RTO, right? We'll make a bunch of money on folks who go into the office, on folks who aren't asking for 2 million a year in stock packages. So arm yourself with people who are pragmatic and really understand what is looking. And I think you'll have a good 18 to 24 months.
Did you start with contingency when building Hampton North, and have you now moved into retained?
So this is an interesting question. Um, Anyone who gets me on a search has to retain me. Like that's the way that I do it. We're a small company. There's six of us. Um, we have contingent options. None of them involve getting access to me. We at least ask for an air of exclusivity when we have what we are learning about this business is that most people grade jobs A, B, and C jobs. Like, I think it's pretty standard, right? One, two, and three, hot job, whatever. 95% of your revenue comes from A and maybe B, but you spend 50% of your time trying to mark C jobs. I have nothing wrong with contingent. My biggest client historically has been a contingent client. They've put 1.7 million through me in my career. I think the biggest thing is commitment, right? Like I think you don't have to look at it as hot and cold as retained and contingent. Do these people respect you? Are you getting regular cadence calls? Are they worth your time? A retainer is useful. One of my friends, who is a very successful recruiter, he deals in micro retainers where it's like, hey, to get my attention, I need $1,500 to get started or 2K. Like, and most of our fees are 20, 30, 40, 50K. But if they're not committed enough to give you 2K to get going, how committed are they going to be to giving you feedback? And the same would happen if you were to get construction work done in your house. Hey, I need 2K for the paint. We'll get the rest when it's done. Um, the same could be said like, hey, I need to do this to get going. So I think I don't look at it as binary as retained and contingent, much as like getting my attention is harder on a contingent basis because I have to run the company too. Um, do these people respect and are they worth my time?
And another question, do your LinkedIn posts drive inbound at this point, or is it more visibility top of mind for marketing?
All of the above. So drives inbound, both on the candidate and the client side. One thing I would say, it doesn't always attract the right type of candidates, and managing that has proven to be not the greatest of ROI of my time. And I'm trying to find a little bit way to be a bit more effective of like, hey, I get that you want this 225K work from home job, but you're a 130K in the office person. And everyone thinks that they can get the great jobs. I would say that like 85% of it is me being a billboard, and 15% of it is based on like just, you know, in the same way that like most people know who we are by now, but like Coca-Cola still advertise, right? And you're just like, you know what? I fancy a Diet Coke. And it just gets you. And like if you get people on the right time and the right day, like in the same way that McDonald's advertise, you just get it the right time. So I'd say it's about staying front and center and I don't want anyone to go, crap, who was that? What was that recruiter's name who I was going to get on for this search? If you're in their face every day, they're not going to forget.
And this is a question I think I'm gonna have to try to interpret it a little bit.
Yeah.
But the question is like, no doubt being niche pays dividends, but what's your advice to leadership who asks why you're married to this niche? Or do you have big opportunities on your door that are not in your niche? So I want to try to maybe like interpret that as like, do you ever have stuff that's outside of your wheelhouse? Do you ever take that on? Or what do you do with it?
So again, to the point. So from a leadership perspective, I run my own company now, so it's a little different if that's a question you're working for a corp. But I had a specialism at my previous place, right? And so my leadership was they were very deliberate about building specialisms. That was a corporate agenda for them. So if you're talking about internal recruitment leadership, they had bought into my ideas to do this and to grow this. Um, Look, if things fall out of my specialism, I think we got to talk about by how much, right? Like if I've got an IT network engineer or a desktop support engineer that I think we can fill and we know and trust and like the client, if it's 1 degree of separation, sure. If we know the client, we know we're going to get exclusivity, they know we're going to trust us, we can get it done. My colleague Ruby, she's on an IT director search right now. It's not quite security adjacent enough. We have a 100% placement record with the client. We're going to get this done. As things start to get a little more further removed from what we do, I've referred to a friend of mine and friends of the business. And and I know that they're very good. I've referred, you know, sales opportunities, lawyers, financial controllers, stuff I'm not good at. The reality is you're probably going to do a bad job and actually dilute how your clients view you. Whereas if you have a niche where, if they're hiring three, four, 5 people a year, you're guaranteed to get them. A lot, I don't know if everyone knows this, but a lot of big corps will rate agency efficiency at the end of the year. So if you're taking every job from a MasterCard as an example, right? They give you 862 jobs and you fill four of them, you're probably not getting invited back to the party next year. You're at the low end of the agencies. So, if they're looking at, okay, well, we're only taking everything under the CISO org or the security org, we only got 23 roles. Let's say that even if this is like a contingent fight, we filled 11, we're going to get invited back next year, and you get a chance to ask for the bigger stuff. So I think it's useful to understand that saying yes to everything, like the best recruiters know the power of no. And a good friend of mine, Mike Anderson's, not no is a full sentence. And if you stick by what's a good use of your time and what's not, that's going to put you in a good kind of stance.
Mike Anderson's awesome. I think you just had him doing a training session for you guys,
He
right?
did run a training session. It was really good.
Awesome. Somebody asked about your like personal brand is great for you being solo, but how do you approach a brand with new business sales strategy when you're scaling and building a team?
It is like brushing my teeth for me. Like it is automatic. Again, it's the reality is I'm never going to change my voice. And I don't really plan on doing that either. I'm not like I'm inoffensive. I don't. There's certain things that I don't talk about in my career, which is like the usuals. I try to keep religion, politics, the usual. Like, hey, but I'll be divisive on certain hiring situations and what I'm seeing, and I think people appreciate that. I'm sure some don't, but ultimately. I'm never going to change who I am. And like I look at the modern version of scale and the modern founder, right? I don't know that most businesses, I don't plan on growing this to a 250 mega ship. I would rather be a forward-facing CEO, bring great people to this company, utilize AI where it's efficient, have a really high-performing team. Like I don't want to be the biggest. I look at how I want to grow this business and like I look at like Deloitte and McKinsey in terms of like Deloitte is hundreds of thousands of people and they do everything. McKinsey are just the best at strategic consulting and that's what they do. I'd rather be McKinsey. I'd rather be 10, 15, 20 great recruiters who all have great public brands with great voices. That know their domain, are seen as experts, and people are proud to work with us, like versus a huge growth cycle. So again, I'm never going to kind of take away from the fact that my job is about hiring, building, scaling, and bringing the best clients to Hampton North. And part of that strategy is to unleash my personality onto LinkedIn and see how it goes.
And you've been consistent on LinkedIn for a long time too, right?
Correct. It is every day, every day.
Somebody asked like if your USP is quality, but you're pricier than your competition, how do you stick out in a crowded market that is slightly cheaper than you?
Let them race to the bottom. Like the reality is, I'm not here to win on price. And what you'll find in a busier marketplace and in a market that is smaller and niche driven is you should be at the edge of turning away business, right? You should be feeling too busy. And then are you going to work at the 15%? Like, do you really want 17K fees? And I just like I say to clients like, hey, like everyone else is paying me 25%, or everyone else is paying me like like you were just going to go to the bottom of the list internally. Do you want that? And it's really easy for me to say because I do mean it. Um, but I never wanted to win on price, and I never will. Like that's a soft strategy. And here's the thing: like most people don't care. It's not their money, and some people just want to win for their ego. And I'll call them. I'm like, cool. Does it make you? If I start at 30 and you batter me down to 25, do you look like you've got a win internally? Cool. Let's do it. Let's make you look good. Um, and I'm fine. Or like, hey, where are we going to go least resistance? Like, stop messing me around. Cool. I know you want 20, I want 25, but really you've had a conversation about 23. Let's do it. Like, I'm not trying to win on price, but I'm also not trying to be obnoxious in terms of like, okay, I'm trying to squeeze everything. It's just a fair price for what is, I think, my time is useful. I'm saving them, and like the way I look at it is, hiring is fucking hard, and that's why we all like. That's why there's 100 people here that are doing this professionally and making good money. I would hope, and because it's there's such opportunity, and people need the help. If ever they feel like they're doing me a favor, I break up with them as a client.
I
You
just
you
realized
went
I was,
on mute. Yeah.
yeah, I just realized I was still on mute. Well, Stuart, I think we got all the questions in. I just want to say thank you for
Awesome.
literally just jumping in last week, raising your hand. I know a lot of people love the podcast interview with you. I know you've been on a lot of other recruiting podcasts, and I've seen the feedback for every single time that you've shown up. You've given value to the recruiters. So excited that you were here. Thank you for jumping in.
Awesome.
And
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for the questions, folks. Feel free to shoot me a note on LinkedIn. Did I drop my LinkedIn in here?
uh,
That's what
let me do that real quick before I let everybody go.
the worst handle.
Oh, there we go. Oh, Let me just hold on one second. Let me drop it on the everybody. So make sure to follow Stuart. Make sure to connect with him. I mean, he's what he is doing online, whether he knows it or not, is an absolute masterclass on what you can do in the space and the niche that you're in. So once again, thank you everybody for showing up. Thank you for participating. And we got something like 22 more talks to go. This is a powerful week for everybody to grow and just absolutely rock 2025. So Stuart, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, folks. Have good years.
Bye.
Bye.